started the series, I knew that there was going to be a few shows that were eventually going to be covered. Courage the Cowardly Dog was one of them. First things first, what do I remember? Courage the Cowardly Dog is about a cowardly dog named Courage. More specifically, Courage is adopted by Muriel, who lives in the middle of nowhere with her husband Eustace back. But creepy stuff happens in nowhere, and it's up to Courage to save his new home. Information from the theme song aside, I remember the show had the most interesting and strange visuals. The various different bad guys that come into play all have their own kind of varying levels of creepy. I also think this show might be a large part as to why I like spooky things, too. In each episode, some new bad guy shows up and in some way threatens Muriel, and Courage, even though he's terrified, is able to step up and face those fears and save Muriel, and on occasion Eustace too. That's basically it. So let's go ahead and watch a few episodes and see what we think.
1 million zillion jillion dillion cotillion times later.
Unsurprisingly, this show still holds up really well. The creativity on display in this show is impressive. In the first few episodes that I watched, here is the list of the bad guys that Courage went up against. The shadow of an evil rich old man who gains sentience after the rich old man dies of a heart attack. A French con duck named La Quack who poses as an amnesia doctor. A Bigfoot. A bottle of hair-growing tonic that whenever the person who is using it gets angry causes explosions to happen. A demon in a mattress that likes to possess people. A pair of alien ducks that sound vaguely like the Beatles. A ghostly pair of arms that manifest because of Eustace's greed. A foot fungus that fully consumes Eustace and turns into a giant foot gangster. And finally, really early in the show, it gave us two of our most iconic villains. Freaky Fred, the barber nephew of Muriel, who has a compulsion to shave pretty much anything, all while having a big smile on his face. And King Ramses, he of Return the Slab fame, who always appears whenever his slab gets taken and unleashes a series of plagues until the slab is returned. Speaking of Ramses, this show is creepy. I know I mentioned that back when I was talking about what I remembered, but it absolutely bears repeating here. Ramses is a perfect example of this because he's a fully different animation style. He is a 3D model in a 2D world. The show manages to tap into that uncanny valley both with this episode and just pretty much all of them. Everything seems either slightly off or very off. While the show's visuals are remarkable, part of the reason that they work so well is because of our three main characters that the visuals are happening to. There's Muriel, who's the best mix of the kindest, sweetest old lady that you've ever met, and someone who isn't going to put up with anybody's shit. She's also weirdly oblivious at times. There'll be moments when the world is literally falling apart around her and she just won't notice. There's Eustace, who's just absolutely the worst person, but it does mean that whenever he gets his comeuppance at the end of the episode, it's all that much more satisfying, especially because usually it's due to his own actions. This is one of those shows where the status quo gets reset every episode, so even if the episode ends with Eustace being vaporized by an explosion, or trapped in a box, or having to guard King Ramses' tomb for all eternity, by the beginning of the next episode, Eustace will be alive and well again, so that something else terrible can happen to him because of his own greed. And finally, we have our title character, Courage. Courage is the epitome of just because you're courageous, it doesn't mean you're never scared. Courage is constantly terrified, but he will face eldritch horrors head on if it means protecting Muriel. He's a great character to be following in all of these episodes. Speaking of characters, there is one that I somehow forgot, and that is the sassy computer. There is a computer in the attic that Courage will use on occasion to help him with whatever monster is invading his home. And the computer will help him, they'll just be sassy and British first, and I love them for it. A couple of things that I want to touch on real quick before I wrap this video up. One, I love that the big bad of the episode isn't always bad. Often it is, but occasionally it's just someone who's misunderstood because they look different, or they're trying to do something noble in the worst way possible. It adds some nuance to the episodes. Finally, this show is just hilarious. I think it can be eclipsed by how creepy the show can be, which granted I think is a large part of the show, but it can also just be straight up hilarious. Like the scene where Eustace and Muriel are being controlled and they're fighting like Rock'em Sock'em Robots. Ultimately, yeah, obviously I still really like this show. I think it's really good at being really creepy while staying child-friendly. I think it's a very nuanced show, especially considering how episodic it is. And I think it's very good at being a show for kids while at the same time still being entertaining for the adults. I highly recommend checking it out if you haven't already, and I will definitely keep watching. So, with all of that being said, I will see all of you